Welcome everybody to our final session. It's going to be a keynote speech by Honorable Marjorie Margolies, which I really thank for being here. She is going to be introduced by President Chris Ames, which I would like to thank. Why are we not seeing this? No. What is on Zoom is in here. So we need to, and the video is on. So what is wrong here? Okay. Okay, very good. So Marjorie is going to be introduced by President Ames, which I would like to thank. I'm also taking this this occasion to publicly thank Rose and Janet, without which we could have not done this. Work in the president's office, and Shelley Calabrese was the director of the Women's Institute, and last but not least, the people who stay in the shadows, but without which we couldn't have done this at all. So thank you very much. And Mr. President, up to you.
So greetings all conference participants. As Frederica said, I'm Chris Ames, the president of Russell Sage College in Albany and Troy, New York. And I'm really delighted to have just a moment here at the end of our day and a half together to thank all the conference organizers and all the participants and panelists for assembling an international group of scholars and practitioners to advance the dialogue on women in leadership in various arenas in the EU and the US. I'm pleased to see that these talented participants have gathered for a day and a half, some of them virtually and many of them physically, on the Russell Sage campus, which is a college that was founded by the first great female philanthropist in the United States, Olivia Slocum Sage. As Frederica mentioned, the credit for organizing and supporting this conference goes to various people. One of them is Frederica Bindi, who is the inaugural affiliate scholar of the Women's Institute at Russell Sage and a member of the Institute for Women's Policy Research. And as she mentioned, to Shelley Calabrese, the executive director of the Women's Institute. The conference is supported by the Erasmus Plus program of the European Union and by Russell Sage College. And thank you as well to the Russell Sage College employees who've worked quite a bit in advance in the last couple of days. She mentioned Rose Grignon, Janet Rondo from my office, the members of conferences and events and information technology. We're really grateful for that. As I was thinking about what I'd heard over the last day and a half, I recall the moment we had at a speech earlier this year. We had Marty Seligman as a guest here. He's known as the father of positive psychology. He's a professor at Penn. And he was giving a really wide-ranging talk, sort of about the future of civilization, if you can imagine, and covering that all. But at one point, he offered a thought experiment. He said, imagine a newspaper that comes out not every day, but comes out once each century, on the first day of each century. What would be the headline to describe the 20th century? And he gave us a moment to think, and I'm going to come back to that. His answer was not something about Stalin, not something about Hitler, but it would be human life expectancy doubles. That was a pretty good answer. But silently to myself, I had answered thinking of 1900 to 2000 as women assume world leadership. As we know, that's a bit hyperbolic, perhaps a tad over-optimistic, but I think it reflects how profound the change in the status of women between 1900 and 2000 has been in suffrage, in political representation, in legal status, in labor force participation, in wages, and in leadership positions. And of course, those advances are unevenly distributed, and as our panelists have described, the circumscription of opportunity by gender remains a formidable obstacle. But that's an obstacle in which the work of these scholars is playing a role in removing and overcoming. And it also underscores the need for activities like this conference, for the work of the Women's Institute at Russell Sage College, for the Institute for Women's Policy Research as well. So given our topic, I can think of no more fitting person to close out our session with the keynote than our guest this afternoon, Marjorie Margolies, who is the founding president of Women's Campaign International. She has been an important journalist, an elected representative, and an activist for social change, committed to the idea that women's rights and leadership are crucial to the betterment of the world. As a television journalist for over 15 years, Margolies earned 5 Emmy Awards. She was then the first woman elected to Congress from the state of Pennsylvania, the first unmarried woman to adopt internationally, which is a remarkable story chronicled in her book, They Came to Stay. So there are a lot of firsts associated with her life and career. She graduated from the University of Pennsylvania, and she's now a professor at the Fellows Institute of Government at Penn. Her organization, Women's Campaign International, partners with grassroots organizations to support leadership development for women and girls around the world, and is committed to the transformative idea that the role of women in the economy propels gender justice. Her most recent book, which we have available in the back, is a memoir about her remarkable and barrier-breaking life. And How Are the Children? Timeless Lessons from the Front Lines of Motherhood. So please join me this afternoon in welcoming Marjorie Margolies.
Thanks so much. We actually we dished last night. We had dinner. He's really terrific. You have a great president, charming. Let me just tell you a little bit about the book and How Are the Children, and the title. It's actually the Maasai warriors, because Women's Campaign International trains women around the world. And the Maasai warriors do not say, "So how are you?" They say, "And how are the children?" So that's the genesis for the title of the book. And I also wanted to say some stuff of what I was hearing, because women have a tendency to marginalize what they have to say by saying, "I'm sorry." I'm sorry. Perhaps this has been said before, which, as I was listening, perhaps this has been said before, or when questions were being answered. Don't do that, because as soon as you start your thought, you've marginalized it. And we've traveled around the world training women, doing trainings, sharing, everything like that. And one of the things that we always say to them is just make your point, get to your point, and don't be sorry for what you are saying. Okay, so let me back up and tell you a little bit about why I think I'm here.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah.
But you must ask me questions. Got it? If you don't, I will start to ask myself questions. Trust me, you don't want that. I'll tell you a little bit about the family, because I think that that's the most interesting thing. I was doing stories. Where are you? Tell me your first name. Yeah, no, you. Hyung? Yes. Hyung? Okay. We were just talking about this. I was a correspondent, I was a reporter, and I was doing a series of stories on hard-to-place children. And I thought, I could do that, which, by the way, it was not as easy as, I don't want to be dismissive. But I started to do a series of stories on adoptees in the United States. And I was with CBS at the time, and I said, let me do a follow-up. Let me go to Korea and see if I can do a follow-up, taking these wonderful kids, wonderful families, seeing if it's a story. So I went to Korea, but I had done a lot of preparation, and I very, very hard as a single person to adopt. It was impossible to do international adoptions. I had lined up a lot of things, and it was at a time, very important time, where African-American kids the ones who were hard placed to adopt were being placed in Black families, in African-American families, not white families, and certainly not white single families. So I started to talk to what was available, et cetera. And when I got to Korea, I had my paperwork in order, and as I was getting ready to leave, they said, "We picked a little girl for you." And I mean, all of a sudden I was delivering somehow. I had had a pre-adoptive pregnancy of 2.5 years. I was in my late 20s. And this little girl came and she said, "How do you do?" And that was Lee Hay. Now, she is now a serious old person. She has 3 kids, 2 of whom have graduated from college. And they're great. The second child I adopted was half Vietnamese, half American. Lee Hay was, they mentioned that I wrote a book called They Came to Stay. In this book, there was a chapter called They Stayed. Holly was half Vietnamese, half Vietnamese, half American. And as easy as Lee Hay was, Holly was absolutely impossible. She was 6 years old, she smoked, and she was a pickpocket, and she was really good. The most hilarious person I have ever met, the naughtiest person, my most arrested child, as in mom calling from the police station. You're supposed to get married or pregnant first. I mean, this was Holly. Holly died about 4 years ago. She was in the process of writing a book entitled 100 Ways to Play With Yourself. And I mean, it was hilarious. I mean, you know, how you can take yourself through all different kinds of complicated, unnecessary with scenarios. She was amazing. Okay, 2 kids, as a single person. I married somebody who had 4 little girls. So we had 6 girls when we got married. Then we had homemade 2 boys who are also now older people. One of them you've read about a lot, I think, and he doesn't want to be, you can't find a lot on him, but anyway, he's married to Chelsea Clinton. And then we had been taking refugee families in for many, many years. We had them for 6 months, a year, 2 years, whatever. And we moved to the Philadelphia area. And because we were becoming quite politically active. And we got a call saying, "Would you take a refugee family?" No, it was actually a mother and a little boy. The little boy was 4 years old. We said, "Sure." She came with, Vu is his name. And then within the year, they said there were 2 nephews. "Would you take the nephews?" And we said, "Okay." And then about 3 or 4 years later, we found her husband in an education camp in Vietnam. And he came and they stayed with us for 25 years. Now, Vu is an anesthesiologist now, and he helped with the book. And his story was kind of, it was inside the book. And I read it and I thought, no, this is where it should start. And the key, and we were just talking about it earlier, the key really was, we were on vacation in Venezuela someplace with 9 of the kids. We're walking down the beach, and Vu said to me, "What would have happened to me had my file been on a different desk that day?" And it kind of put everything in perspective. That's our whole family. I mean, you think here maybe tables of people saying, "Oh, they would be good in that family. They would be good." And that was Vu's question. What would have happened to me had my file been on a different desk that day? I thought, gosh, that's so good. And then he wrote the intro. He after Hillary did the forward, and then you hit Vu's reality check. So there's quite a bit about the family, and then there's a bit about having served in Congress. I had a very unusual stay in Congress. I came in the year of the woman, 1992, first year of the woman, and I went out in the year of Newt, or as Hillary says, gotta feel sorry for somebody whose mother named him Newt. But then I became the head of our delegation for the Beijing conference in '95. I mean, we were born. And when we got back, this White House called us in and said, we need more women to the table. So born was Women's Campaign International. Women's Campaign International is an organization that started in 1998, and we travel around the world and we train women to be leaders. So, and we also kind of roll with the punches. In Malawi, we doubled the number of women in parliament. And one of our women, Callista Chimumbu Wamutarika, went from being a member of parliament to being on the a part of the president's cabinet. And then she married him. So then we had a first lady. And then we did a First Ladies Initiative in Africa. We really do roll with the punches. We went into Liberia. We actually had a DoD grant, a Department of Defense grant, because there are not enough women at the table, which we've been hearing about. There are not enough women at the table. We got a DoD grant to get women to the table so that if you are negotiating peace, there are women there. Liberia was up for grabs. We went into Liberia with a DoD grant. You say, the United States Agency for International Development, really liked what we were doing. So we stayed there for a very long time. And one of the things that we do, and I will gladly tell you about this, we do a lot of communications. How you get your point across? What's a middle and beginning, and what's a beginning, a middle, and end, and how you do it, and how you are sensitized to that. You know, how you deal with the press, how you get your point across. So we were in Liberia working with USAID for many, many years with absolutely every single solitary division, community. And we were there, and when Ebola hit, Ebola is a disease of information. And I don't know if you know what the 10 top recommendations are with Ebola, and that is basically stop the ritual cleansing. One of the things that was fascinating was that in these communities, if you had Ebola and you came back to your community, you were rejected, and it's exactly what should not happen. If you've had Ebola, you're immune. So you should be used in the hospitals. You should be used to put together food offerings, things like that. We went around the whole country talking about what you had to do to stop Ebola. If you read anything about, I'm sure you will, if you read anything about how it was stopped, we're always mentioned it. That's what Women's Campaign International does. So that's what we have been doing. We are still doing it right now. Let's see, since 2006, we've been in Afghanistan. And that is an extreme. Afghanistan has been taken off the front pages of the newspapers.
This is you with Afghan.
Oh my gosh, that's really impressive. How'd you do that? I'm impressed.
Some of WCI.
Oh, and you know who that is? That's Valerie Biden Owens, is Joe Biden's sister, the one with the necklace on. But we have been in Afghanistan for years, and our women, except for the ones who either had relatives here or who had all of the papers, couldn't get out. They're still there. And we're talking about doctors and lawyers and professors and amazing people who are in hiding and starving. So what we are doing, which is a real challenge, is trying to figure out how we can get to the families, not through these fancy groups. We're not a fancy group, but we're trying to figure out how we can get funding through the very complicated maze there to get to the families so that they can be fed basics. For instance, we had 2 ministers who helped women a lot, and they helped WCI a lot. And when Afghanistan fell, one of them was immediately killed by the Taliban, and the other, with 6 kids, we helped get out. And what he says, which is fascinating to me, is they really expected to have 6 months to figure things out, just so that they could get their banking straight, sell their places, whatever it was, and it fell in 11 days. So that as you hear these stories that are just so incredibly sad, we are now working in the Ukraine, trying to figure out how, it's a very different equation for a ton of different reasons, but there are lots of folks who have families here who are from Ukraine, but most people from the Ukraine want to stay in Europe because they want to go back. They want to go home. So it's a very, very different equation. Could I stop and could you ask me questions? Or would you want me to babble on? I mean, I can go on for a very long period of time.
Go, you're fascinating.
Oh, I'm really fascinating. But no, but I really want to know what you'd like to know because or what road you would like me to continue down.
Go.
Yes. Oh, I know about that. Afghan. Everything. Yeah. But education period. Well, let me tell you a little bit about my experience with the Vietnamese family. First of all, there's Valerie. Oh, and there's Fed. Oh my God. It isn't right for everybody, but it's a fabulous experience if you do it. I mean, my kids, honestly, as you know, I like them most of the time, but I mean, my kids could land any place. And they say that. Plop. They really could land any place. And it is because of, you know, the fact that they were brought up, there were 11 kids, there were 21 grandchildren. It's a group, it doesn't work all the time. And when it falls apart, it really falls apart. So it isn't right for everybody. But I would watch my kids. I can remember I was speaking the other day, and I remember one of my kids. I have an artist child who is in Austria, and he was an incredibly interesting kid. He came home one day, and I had lost a race, and he said to me, one of the kids at school said to him, "You're just as much a loser as your mother." And I said, well, how did that make you feel? And he said, you know, he didn't quite say it. He said, the kid is such a jerk. You know, I mean, it's kind of like consider the source. We always said it, you know, consider the source. And that's, I knew that he had heard what I wanted him to hear. He was a kid who came, we were approached because there was a young kid, a little girl who was 6 years old who was missing arms, and she was being adopted from Thailand, and the family had its doubts, and they pulled out. And we got a call saying, we have a little girl from Thailand who doesn't have any arms. Would you accept her in the family? I said, sure. And I called and I got prostheses, I called the school, everything like that. And I asked my youngest, because he would have been displaced as the youngest. And I asked him how he felt about it. And he said, honest to goodness, he said, we don't have one of those. Oh my God. Anyway, the family decided to take her, and I followed her through the many years. But yes, but it's he's my baby. Oh my gosh. Oh, he's such a doll. He really is. He's. I say this lovingly. This is all off the record, right? girls follow him around like they're in heat. I didn't say that. I didn't say that. And the other kids can't understand it. They just can't understand it. What does he have? I mean, he's just a darling little young man who's still a family. Anyway, but yes, but the kids are really wonderful with one another. And, you know, and Mark, of course, married Chelsea, who is an only child. And she's really a good sport, but it's tough. I mean, you see, we put something together the other day, and Hillary and I were kind of standing there, and she said, you know, this is all your fault. I mean, this is with all of these kids, the cousins are incredible when they get together, and it is so random. I mean, it is why are these kids from one file being, but it's amazing. And one of the kids, Vu, the little boy from Vietnam, he now has 3 kids. His son, just an adorable little boy, when he was 10 years old, read Clinton's book. You know, the president is missing. It's a 500-page book. And he went to one of these our get-togethers, and he walked over to Clinton and he said, "Can I ask you a question?" You know, Clinton's such a charm bomber. He's so amazing. He's so wonderful with these kids. Pop, he's called. And Clinton, of course, said, sure, sat down. His name is Sebastian. He asked him a whole bunch of questions. And afterwards, Clinton came over to me and said, he blew my mind. And then he said, and he actually used a couple of naughty words. He said, this is what it's all about. This is exactly what it's all about. These are the immigrants. These are the refugees. This is the next generation. And it was really, and it's so true. And for those, you know, looking for families, it's such a rich experience. It isn't for everybody, but it's such an incredibly rich experience. And now we're seeing literally thousands of people coming. Once again, it's hard to get into the United States if you don't have a relative, and the papers are a mess. But I mean, we are looking at pictures, I don't have to tell you this, of people who 2 months ago were living the kind of lives that we're living. You know, they were going to school and going to graduate school, and you know, but they were physicians and now they're refugees in the most challenging places, situations. Come on, this looks like such an inquisitive group. Yes.
Really provocative, if I may.
Oh, well, that's okay.
We in Europe have a problem with birth rate.
Birth rate.
Yes, we don't have children anymore.
Really?
Oh yeah, in Italy there are more people who die than people who are born.
So if I went to a party, and I said, okay, how many of you are having kids?
Yeah, very few. I mean, in my 60th birthday party, there were 16 of us, and I and my husband were the only one who had children. All the others had no children. And you have 1, maybe 2. If you have 3, you really are incredible.
You're really right.
How 3 kids, impossible. But there isn't at all this culture that you are describing, of opening your home to children from everywhere. Do you think that this is because America has been made by migrants, and therefore culturally is much more open to taking people from everywhere who are not linked to you by blood? Because I think that there is a big problem in Europe, particularly salary, if they don't belong to you with blood, you don't have the same blood. It's not a question of color, it's not a question of sex, it's is the fact that they are not linked to you by blood, then you are not open to that. Is there anything that maybe could be done to make more acceptable in Europe to be more open to having people from
That's
particular children?
that's such an interesting question, really. And I had not heard, have you heard a lot about that? I mean, it's something that I haven't heard a tremendous amount about with regard to procreation, with regard to having kids. I don't know what the answer to that question is. I can tell you, being personal, I was brought up in a family whenever and my parents, by the way, thought I was certifiable with regard to taking. But anytime I asked my father, for instance, I had been abroad, I said, could you sponsor these young women? And some of them, and one of them we still keep in touch with weekly, they always said yes. It was something that, let's back up generationally. I do think it's something that does happen here in the United States more often than any place else, because we're a melting pot. But that's a fascinating question. I don't know the answer to it. I mean, I think it's just people like you who have dared to have children, but it's talking about it because it's so necessary and so rewarding. Forget all of the generational or fears, clearly, but it's interesting. Anybody have an answer to that? Fed? Do you have an answer to that? No.
No, but no, I don't have an answer, but it is. I mean, I think this is also because this is a country which have received people for many centuries.
And I think you talk about, I mean, my grandparents did. My grandparents brought people over, especially around the time of the Holocaust. We still have relatives who say, your grandmother and grandfather sponsored us. I don't know. And it isn't a long time ago. So yes, good question. Yes, sir.
It's a whole different topic.
Oh, sure.
I just figure you're likely an expert on Pennsylvania politics.
Oh,
And
spare me.
well, Pennsylvania's been in the news.
I know.
Presidential elections.
I know.
Interesting senatorial campaign going on. There's one of the states that went to the Supreme Court over election rules last year. What's your analysis of what's going on now in terms of the presidential election?
You don't see it, but Trump came out for Oz, Dr. Oz, he's running. And there's but there's huge amounts of money being spent. And so the Republicans, you may have picked up that I'm a Democrat.
From home they ask us to repeat the question. So President's question was about Pennsylvania politics. And by the way, audience, you are welcome to ask questions as well.
But the Republicans are going at each other, but with gazillions. And Trump has just come out for Oz, and basically what they are saying about Oz is that he's a Hollywood liberal, and they have all of these sound bites from him, sounding like he's anti-choice, sounding like he wants some kind of sane gun control, things like that. So they're going at it. The Democrats are also going at it too, bless their hearts. So it's going to be really interesting. I have no idea how it's going to turn out. I think that right now, we talked a little bit about this last night. I think right now, the midterms don't look good for the Democrats. However, there are some issues that might motivate, especially women, especially if it looks like Roe v. Wade will be overturned. that kind of thing will motivate women, I think, a lot. So it may change the equation, but right now midterms don't look great for Democrats.
And,
Questions from beyond?
yep. And people from home as well, please feel free to ask questions.
Are you just holding your head up, or do you have a question? Okay.
So I have a question.
This is scary.
What has been your biggest challenge?
I guess I was born on a sunny day. And I've had a lot of kind of fits and starts but I think it was just deciding that I was going to do, period. Even if I always say to my kids that, and they throw it back on me in some form, that you can't win if you're not prepared to lose. You can't win if you're not going to get on the playing field. So I think that has been a bit of my challenge, that I decided I was going to I gave up a really good job as a journalist to run for office when I was told that there was no way in the world that I could win. And I won by 1,063 votes, but who remembers? And I was just a tiny, it was a roll of the dice. And then I think my biggest challenge, and I'll tell you the story, it's kind of boring, but you're gonna have to listen, you have no place else to go. I was a Democrat, came from a Republican district, 2-to-1 with regard to registration. And I walked onto the floor of the House, and President Clinton's omnibus spending bill was very, very controversial. Democrats are not known for walking in lockstep with anybody, and chairs of committees and were voting against it. And I had said that I had problems with certain parts of the bill. The cuts weren't deep enough, entitlements weren't handled. I had said that, and of course it was said to the press that I was against it. And I walked into the Capitol that night, got a call from the president. I did not say, I want your firstborn, I swear. Although I did say that at the wedding. I want your firstborn. I said to him, we have to talk about more cuts. We need to address entitlements and all that kind of stuff. And I'll only be your last vote. I did think that, I thought he would be a one-term president if this piece of legislation did not pass. It was that serious. And I will only be your last vote. And I'm sure you know it. A tie in the House, 217, the vote goes down. Tie in the Senate, it's broken by the vice president. It was a tie. And there had been, and I thought there had only been 2 votes like that in history. If anybody knows that, you should just automatically just give them a diploma. Anybody know what 2 votes ties? I'll let you know. You wouldn't know, come on. You're clean. One was for the impeachment of Andrew Johnson. The second one was the draft. So there were 2 votes like that, where they were going to go down. They needed somebody broke the tie, and so I thought I was clear. I thought I wouldn't, but I wasn't. So I cast the deciding vote, and it was really and there were people, especially from my own delegation, Republicans, literally jumping up and down, saying "Bye bye, Marjorie." They were right. They were jerky, and some of them were really good jumpers. But that's what happened. I mean, I would think, looking back on my rare experience as a carbon-based Homo sapien, that definitely was one thing where, because I think I would have. It's hard to lose a seat, truly. I think I would have held on to my seat.
Would you do it again?
I think I would have protested more, but yeah, I would do it again. and I thought it was the right thing to do. I mean, I was standing there with a guy who was Bill Clinton's member of Congress. I mean, he lived in Arkansas. He was Bill Clinton's member of Congress. And I said to him, you gotta vote for this thing. Okay. And I had won it with 72% in his last race. I can't vote for 4.6 cents per gallon gasoline tax. You know, it was crazy. I said, what? Anyway, many of these members of Congress just want to hold on to their seats, as you well know, this just in. Okay. Yes.
Yep, Ariane. Come over here.
But see, you're compromising what you're saying. She just said it. Thank you for giving it. She said, is this a boring question? It's not going to be a boring question.
But it is about the trainings that you do and whether you had to make a major shift, something, you know, when you think back how you started, whether there were mistakes or misconceptions or how that changed.
That's a really good question. Yes. And what we had to learn a lot of is that we can't go in assuming that we know what they need, want, and that we can't go in arrogantly as if we know the answer. So we will go in, and I always send an assessment group, and sometimes for a long time, figuring out what works. And there are times when, not often, but there are times when we will say, this is not the right thing for us. And then we'll work, and we do a lot of landing, employing people on the grounds. I mean, in Liberia, we had 15 employees. I mean, we work very closely with the people there so that we know what's going on. And then sometimes in the middle, we'll say to each other, we're not going in the right direction. Let's kind of regroup and get the thought people on the ground. One of the things that we do really well is we get into the communities and we listen a lot, and we really are not, let me use the word again, arrogant. But yes, we try hard because there's so many groups that just do drive-bys. You know, they'll land. One of our biggest problems is that if we get a grant, it's over when the grant. We did a training in the Middle East and Northern Africa, the MENA region, and we were supposed to work with 18 countries, but it became too dangerous. We worked with 16 different countries, and when it was over, it was over. And you know, keep in touch with them a lot, but it's really hard because as you go, and we were really creamed by COVID, just creamed, because we do international work. We had a small program where we brought the international stuff to the Philadelphia area. It's a GALS program, Girls Advocacy and Leadership Series. And we just grew that so we could continue, and we kept in touch with people from all over the world. We were literally on our way to do a program in Africa when everything shut down. So we did it remotely, and we did it as a pilot. It happened to be that the young girls we were going to be working with were becoming pregnant because of school, et cetera. So we did a program to work with these young women. But we roll with the punches, but it becomes much more, it's very challenging. And also, you know, I think it's very compelling. Help women, you know, and people walk out and say, this is great, we'd love to help you. Very hard to raise money for, why am I talking to myself?
No. I want to show you your tray.
But I was just hearing an echo. But it's very, very hard to convince people to raise money for women because the thought is, bless their hearts, those white men. No, but the feeling is you can easily get volunteers, and a lot of the people we work with are volunteers, but you can only do that for so long, and you can only have a little bit of impact. I mean, the impact is just completely different when you have people who are when you have overhead and when you have all those stresses. Yeah, but that was an excellent question. A plus. Yeah. Yes.
Thank you for everything that you've shared so far. My question is based on what your last comment was. Who are some of the groups, organizations that you partner with, either in each of the countries that you go to, or some of the international partners that might help to defray some of the day-to-day stressors?
That's a great question. Yes. The question is, with whom do we work? Who are our partners? Either international partners when we get to a country or before we go, I suspect, that we are forever trying to partner with groups. And we've been quite successful, and it changes the equation completely. So we'll go to, especially some of our funders, and say, okay, who's there? With whom can we? One of the biggest problems over COVID is so many of the people, so many of the 501c3s that we've worked with have closed. So we try, but once we get to any place, we'll say, okay, this is what we do. We'll go to USAID or any of we work with DOD or something like that, and we'll say, with whom can we partner? And it varies from each place that we go. But it's terrific. It makes all the difference in the world. And women have to start to be, it's very challenging. I mean, when we started, we would go into a room trying to raise money. And because the amount was always so pathetic, the women they felt as though they were working against each other. And we had to make sure, when we were hoping, and we've tried really hard, but understanding that the money is very limited for the kinds of things that we do. So we have to try to work together, which is what your question really is.
But I also put to this, I also have to say that, for instance, in Afghanistan, this has been one of the major shortfalls.
Yep.
There were tons of people, including us, working on Afghanistan, and no coordination whatsoever, often benefiting the same people, often males, and with the result that those who got through all this training left it, and no obligation to stay in the country. In the US, for instance, you have these programs that they pay for your education, but then you have to serve in the federal government for some times. And they had no obligation. So the people who went through all this training, well, some are in hiding, as Marjorie said, which is really sad. And nobody cares at this point.
No.
It's Ukraine, who cares about the Afghans? We created the situation, but who cares? And the others are abroad. They got jobs and left.
Yeah. No, it's really tough. And the ones we relied on the most, these wonderful women in our office, the women were just extraordinary. They're really screwed, and it's a shame. And as we said before, Afghanistan as a real problem is off the headlines. It's just we're working with a group in Germany that has told us that the refugees are kind of colliding with each other. The Afghan refugees, many are still in Germany, and now the folks coming from Ukraine. It's a huge challenge, yeah. And I feel so bad about the people whom we, I say it lovingly, whom we left. We had to leave in Afghanistan. We just couldn't get them out. Yes.
Yep.
Hi, I was wondering, what do you think about the current state of journalism, and where do you think the profession is headed?
Well, that's an easy one. I understand. I mean, I'm a Luddite, and I mean, when I was in journalism, I actually thought that you had to get both sides of the story, except if it only had one side. I mean, it was clearly. I think journalism is scary these days. I think the whole business about fake news and the extremes, and because I do some commentary. So I do one with Middle East Broadcasting. I don't know if you've ever tuned into Middle East Broadcasting, but it's in Arabic, so it's an instantaneous translation. It's so fascinating to hear what they are thinking in that part of the world. But I watch a lot of Fox News and MSNBC, and I'm an addict. My name is Marjorie, and I'm an addict. So CNN, Jake Tapper was my press secretary. I watched a lot of that stuff, and I think it scares me that it's too instantaneous, that there isn't. It's wonderful that we can share as quickly as we do, but there's not a breath that I remember taking before we went on the air at 6, 7 or whatever it was, where you tried to get both sides. So there's a lot of, I think, stuff that's just not true. And then when you back it up, people don't hear the apology or the correction. I'm hoping that there's going to be more responsibility in journalism. I think it lacks it. I still read those publications that try to get both sides. What do you think?
I think it's hard to say where it's going. Look at the last 10 years and what's happened. And I just really wonder, as we all, you know, it seems like it can only go in one direction. I want to believe that that's not true, but it's simply getting worse.
Go back to what I was saying before, that I think we're good people, and I'm hoping that we'll come to the sane center, the moderate middle. It scares me, and I'm trying really hard not to be politic, but it scares me that there are that many people who believe some of the baloney that's out there, and they'll swear by it, and they will continue to think that some of the things that are being said by the right wing, by Trump, are real, and it really scares me. And my hope is that we are good people, and that people will be moving much more in the same center of moderate. But I think you're right until it becomes perfectly clear that they're coming close to. Coming way too close to the flame. We're gonna have to be careful. We need to have these conversations.
We have a question from the audience online. It's anonymous attendee. With the large family and demanding career, how did you find and maintain your energy? How do you maintain self-care?
That's a tiring question. It didn't work. You can't do it all at the same time, with the same initiative, with the same energy, with the same care, and you have to be prepared for the downtimes. It really didn't work all the time with me. One of the big problems was that when it didn't work, it became public sometimes, so there wasn't any privacy in mistakes. It doesn't work all the time. And I had a lot of help. My oldest child was 14 when my first, Leanne was when my first bio kid was born, and they're totally inseparable. And we always had help, and we had these strange people living with us who were amazing. And so it wasn't a typical family, to say the least. But I say lovingly that it didn't work all the time. I have a very long fuse, and I said to my children all the time, that's not important. And it drove them crazy. And to this day, I'll go and visit them with their families and everything, and they'll say things, and I will not say this because I'm somewhat less obnoxious than one would normally think. But I would say to myself, oh, that came from me. that, you hear that there was a lot of flexibility in our, I remember, I work with former members of Congress. And one former member of Congress 2 weeks ago said to me, she remembers being on a committee with me, Energy and Commerce, and somebody came behind and whispered something in my ear, and we were dealing with something that was somewhat important. And I left, and I came back, Lynn Schenk is her name, and Lynn said to me, what was it? And I said, one of my kids was just not picked up at school, and I had to straighten it out. And I did, because we had a lot of people who were helping. We had a rent-a-father. And we always lived in houses that were big, really big, and we often took in people who would help us out. So in answer to your question, it was a huge juggle, and it often didn't work, although we really did. We had a lot of people who were supporting us. Yes.
Here so they can hear you.
Thank you. Yeah, what's your name, right? Oh, the one in the red jacket?
Rita.
Rita, yes. Hi. I actually wanted to roll back over to her question for a bit. I believe your original question was something to the effect of, I believe the EU's birth rate is declining, correct? And what could she potentially do to, I guess, maybe encourage a more booming birth rate? I actually mulled over that a little bit, and that seems to be a rather interesting sign of the time, because over in Japan, as of 2019, I believe per woman in the country, her lifetime, she expected to perhaps brood 1.36 children in her lifetime. In my country, in Korea, that has significantly dropped in 2020 to actually 0.8, which is amongst the lowest in the country, which is actually the first negative downtrend ever observed. I guess really where I'm going with my thought is, it seems to be a rather bit of a loaded question, because it seems to be both, I guess, a cultural as well as, I guess, a governmental issue, because it seems that nowadays there's really not that much time to be a mother, let alone a parent to their own children anymore. I guess my question for you then is, how do you feel about this in this respect? I know that culture changed a lot since, I guess, I would say something early 20th century. Would you say it's perhaps for better or for worse than potential consequences?
Wow. That's such an interesting question. I think it's cultural. I think it's definitely different in parts of the world, and I think it's going to have its peaks and troughs. I think you're going to see, we'll come back here in 10 years, all drooling, but I think that it's not only cultural. It has a lot to do with the economy. It has a lot to do with world movement. I mean, now we are seeing, I would make a bet that in 5 years, you're going to look at Europe with a real downturn in births, not just a slowing. So I don't know, it's a fabulous question. And whatever you do, I think he should do extremely well here in college, and he should be given a little bit of an honor at graduation. No, that's a good question, and I don't know the answer to it. You've been a wonderful audience.
I have another question for you. Mistakes. We all make mistakes, and yes, we learn from mistakes. We know that, but
I have a chapter in the book that's there's a beauty word, so I won't say, which is way too sophisticated and pure. But one of the chapters in the book is you learn from tough times, you learn from mistakes, you learn from the losses. And I'll say for you, in here, it says something different. Learn. I learned. And I'm not sure I want to. Thank you very much.
and that be said, That being said, mistakes you would repeat and mistakes you would not repeat.
Oh my goodness. Well, I mean, I don't think I'm clever enough to tell you the mistakes that I own up to. The mistakes that I would repeat. I guess as I was moving into this, you know, especially with my parents, I had fabulous parents who really thought and when I started to adopt, my mom said to me, you know, you're putting yourself in the category of a divorcee with children. And so, I mean, it was that kind of things. I mean, I would repeat that mistake in a heartbeat. I mean, it was seriously the best thing I ever did. So the ones that I would repeat and the ones that I wouldn't, I mean, I'm not sure. As I said, I mean, I'm resilient. So, you know, I think, would I not repeat? I don't know. I'm going to get up at 3 o'clock in the morning and I'm going to say, oh, well, that is what I should have, and I'm going to call you. I can't answer that question. But it's a good question. There is no such thing as a bad question. It was on the border.
I asked my mother once and she said I never made a mistake in my life. So.
Oh my goodness, I
That's a
step
different
on my
perception
mistakes.
there.
Oh
Good
my
for you.
goodness. Over and over and over again.
Anybody else?
And
Last
I
chance
wore
to
you
ask
out,
a
huh?
question to Marjorie. Anybody from home? And then we will probably ask one last question and let you go. There are a few young people here, men and women, and we are in a college. So what is your advice, unconventional advice to young people?
Let me, at the risk of repeating myself, I mean, get on the playing field, do it. Even if you think that that you're going to lose, that it's not going to work out, doesn't make any difference. Try. You know, don't worry about, although it doesn't feel good to be rejected, just do it. I mean, and I say that to my kids all the time. Find an oligarch. Okay, you don't have to find an oligarch. But I mean, you know, think short-term, long-term, figure out the best gift you can possibly give yourself is to be overeducated. Do it and, you know, kind of think in terms of, you don't have to keep a diary or anything, but think in those terms. You know, think in, be nice to your parents. And grow that. I mean, realize what your growth is going to be. The other thing that I find is semi-interesting is that as we do, I teach a class at the University of Pennsylvania with a guy by the name of David Eisenhower. And where did that oh wow come from? Oh, okay. And this is for the next time you're at a cocktail party. This is in the trivia category. David Eisenhower was Ike's favorite grandson. And that is the reason why Camp David is called Camp David. He changed it from Shangri-La to Camp David because of David Eisenhower. And David is a doll. And I teach a class with him we teach in between, but every 4 years. And it's at Annenberg. And we take the whole class to both conventions. And it's an amazing experience. We've been doing it since 2020. So some of those kids are people we could be working with now, but working for. But one of the things that I've learned is that, and this is in answer to the question, is that people who are in really responsible roles, I mean, really responsible, president, vice president, senators, all that, love to talk to kids. So ask. I mean, and as we get close to the conventions, I call all of those folks all the time and say, oh, I have a class, would you like to speak to them? And they do. And the kids get so much out of it. And so many of them have kept in touch with and have gotten jobs from these folks. So, I mean, I think in answer to the question, you know, do it, ask, don't be afraid to be rejected. You know, try to be a little bit diplomatic, but do it. And sometimes it works and sometimes it doesn't. Thank you.
Thank you so much.